in your time studying and explaining Bitcoin concepts, what have you learned about how to become a better educator?
So one of the things I've always done, like everyone has their own approach to it, but instead of learning this 2-minute pitch or something where you try to convince someone and you throw around all the aspects of money that are so important, of hard money, or just having some kind of fixed story that you tell every time, instead of doing that, I like to ask people what they already know about Bitcoin, because immediately in just like a minute or something, you learn like how much do they actually know. Like, have they done any kind of research on this? You can immediately pick out misconceptions, just obvious things that people always repeat that are false in some kind of way. Or you can learn sort of what kind of angle they come at it from, what their position on it is. There's a lot of interesting aspects you can learn just by listening for that 1 minute rather than immediately jumping into your version of the story. And you can then process that and sort of address them from an angle that makes sense for them. So if you're talking about how Bitcoin is amazing, like if your usual pitch is something like, oh, Bitcoin's amazing for like transactions all around the world, but you're talking to someone who lives in a first world country, who has access to online banking, who can pay with their plastic card everywhere, it's not going to resonate with them as well as someone who might do remittances frequently and actually need this for their personal use cases, or maybe their family needs it or something like that. So just getting that first impression, like sort of what do you know? Because at this point, almost everyone knows something about Bitcoin. That already sort of gets you going and allows you to, what I like to do as well, is not convince them that Bitcoin is great for them or that it's better. Instead, I try to assess, like, are they positive on it at the moment, somewhat neutral, or somewhat negative? And if they're quite positive about it, you can just easily have a nice conversation. If they're pretty neutral, then it's kind of showing them like there's more to it than you think. There's some potential there, some things that might be really interesting for you. And if they're negative about it, I don't try to make them positive about it. It's too much of a jump. Instead, I try to correct sort of the misconceptions that they immediately throw at me. I just point out to them in a calm way that they're wrong about these things, and that there's a lot of research that can be done, and to sort of challenge that, to try to get them in that neutral camp. Like, okay, maybe everything I've been told isn't quite true, and I should be giving another thought about this. So and look into it. So that's sort of been my overall approach in general. And the second thing besides that has been visualizing Bitcoin much more, because it's so abstract. Like, you can talk on podcasts for hours, but some people just need to see things. As people often talk about this magical moment of just sending your first Bitcoin transaction and seeing that does a lot to you rather than just talking about it for an hour or two. So,
So you'll have people actually, like if you're teaching someone about Bitcoin, you'll actually have them send a transaction or send $1 to them or something like that.
Yeah, these types of things, like just like I've done courses like this in a classroom where you have 15 people, and then you just go through all of the steps. Like, hey, this is how you set up a wallet. This is how you send a transaction. Now we can go look up that transaction in a block explorer. Just doing that for the first time for a lot of people is kind of crazy. But if you don't have that kind of time, which will often be the case, it can also be the case of explaining Bitcoin to someone through some visuals rather than just naming all of the elements of money and sort of talking about how governments are printing so much money and stuff. Like, just showing a graph of how much money governments print already does so much more than saying that they print money, because then people can be like, yeah, but like, how big of a deal is that? Well, here are the stats. It is a big deal.
Yeah, right. I that's a really interesting framework you're using there to kind of reach people where they are, and rather than talking past them with your favorite talking points, and rather than coming out of the gates, with your 2-minute pitch, you're taking, this is a page out of the consultant's handbook, I guess, that I learned a while back when I was back in business school. The first lesson everyone says is like, ask the questions first, rather than like, instead of coming in with all your recommendations, do this, do this, do this, you got to ask, figure out where that person's at, what they're, in the business setting, it's figure out what their goals are and what they're trying to accomplish. And in the Bitcoin setting, maybe it's, what do you know about Bitcoin?
And it gets people excited too.
Yeah.
It makes it interactive in a way, rather than I'm just here like sort of narrating, like kind of barraging you with information that's just way too much. And then occasionally asking a question, they'll respond with 3 words, and then you go off again for 5 minutes. A lot of people don't enjoy that. They want to feel like they're being listened to, like their perspective is something to consider as well. So
Right.
I found more sort of success in doing it that way than just kind of overwhelming them with information and then not really having a conversation.